Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Plotkin. I am excited to be interviewing you. I first want to introduce Dr. Stanley Plotkin, who is one of our professor emeriti at University of Pennsylvania, as well as the Wistar Institute, and an esteemed vaccine researcher that we all respect very much. And I am Dr. Elizabeth Schlaudecker. I'm a pediatric infectious disease doctor at Cincinnati Children's Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I am also a member of the board of WSPID. And I'm excited to be here today and excited to ask a few questions about the history of WSPID and a lot of the things that we have been excited to learn about from you, Dr. Plotkin. So first of all, I really want to focus on the fact that it is the 30th year of WSPID, and I am grateful to be a part of it, but I don't know much about how it started and how the idea for the World Society of Pediatric Infectious Diseases was conceptualized many years ago.
Well, of course, you're depending on the memory of an elderly individual, so I can't say that I remember all the details. But what I do remember is that in the year 2000, a number of pediatric infectious disease specialists throughout the world were meeting sporadically with each other at various local meetings. I don't remember exactly how the idea became formulated, but in discussion with some of my colleagues in other parts of the world, the idea formed itself that we needed a worldwide organization because many people were traveling to meetings in other parts of the world, anxious to meet other specialists in pediatric infectious diseases. And it seemed obvious that having an international meeting somewhere where people from all over the world could meet was an obvious advantage to the formulation of international connections between people in pediatric infectious diseases. So, as I'm implying, the original idea sort of came from discussions between myself and many other people elsewhere in the world, and we decided to form a meeting starting in the year 2000, as I recall. The first meetings were really extremely informal. That is, it was essentially simply getting together in one place and having a relatively small number of people attend. However, in 2001 and 2002, there were lots of discussions, both in person and also by email and by telephone, between pediatric infectious disease researchers in different parts of the world. And as I recall, the first what I would call major meeting was in 2003, where we met in Santiago. No, it was in 2002. We met in Santiago, Chile, and in 2003. Not remembering for the moment where that meeting was, but the meetings grew in size during that period. And we began to have a structure, that is, officers and lots of contact with pediatric infectious disease organizations throughout the world. Now, I must say that some of the discussions were heated. Mm-hmm. That is, there was not complete agreement on what the motives of the organization were and who would be the officers, etc. But those disagreements gradually disappeared because the idea of getting together, the idea that pediatric infectious diseases, like other aspects of science, was now international. Well, I mean, science is international by definition, but medicine is a bit different in that there are different practices in different parts of the world and different infectious diseases in different parts of the world. But the conversations held at those original meetings were ultimately so fruitful that the individuals became convinced that there was something positive to the idea of having, in addition to local meetings, an international meeting. So those are my major recollections of those original ideas. Now, what role did I personally play? You know, well, I can say is I think maybe part of the idea was mine, but I was not the only one. There were lots of people who wanted to establish international connections. And we did have to iron out individual differences and financial issues, etc. But the initial meetings were so fruitful that the desire to establish a major organization formulated itself and led to the subsequent meetings of that organization.
That's pretty neat for me to think about because I was just starting my pediatric residency then and had pretty quickly decided on focusing on pediatric infectious diseases. And I went to my first WSPID Congress, just a few years after that. And it seemed like a very well established and a very organized organization. So it's still pretty amazing for me to think about that it was just starting around that time. And obviously, continues to thrive. I do think it is interesting to look back now as the years have gone by and think about what do you think is the most significant achievement that WSPID has made, or how do you think it has contributed to pediatric infectious diseases over the years?
Well, I think my response to that would be more or less along the lines of what is happening in science. Science has always been international, but medicine less so because of differences in the incidence of diseases and differences in practice. That is, the different practices in different parts of the world. So I think, in a way, this has been part of the international development of science. I mean, science is now the best example of how people from different parts of the world can collaborate, how they can produce knowledge and better conditions for their populations by collaborating with each other. The idea is sort of obvious, but it's an idea that has developed over time, really over centuries of time, but is now even more important because the world in the 19th century was still very separate. But in this century, there really is one world, and infectious diseases travel from one part of the world to the other. An example which comes to mind because I was just involved in a discussion is chikungunya.
Mm-hmm.
which started out as an African disease, spread to Asia, particularly to India, from there to the southern Pacific, and also from there to South America, and is spreading north and is on our borders,
Mm-hmm.
that is, American borders now. So, infectious diseases are now truly international, and therefore, people from different parts of the world want to know what
Mm-hmm.
advances have been made in other parts of the world, what the epidemiologic situation is, what is the risk of travelers coming from that part of the world to bring the infections to wherever that person is. And the job of an international organization is to disseminate
Mm-hmm.
information from one group of researchers to another in different parts of the world. And therefore, the role of those organizations is much more important, in fact, than it used to be. It is now, those organizations are really critical now.
I agree. And that's a good segue to talking about what do you think has changed the most in pediatric infectious diseases, good and bad, over the last 30 years as a whole? Are there things that jump out, or things that maybe are things that we need to be focusing on as a subspecialty right now?
Well, that's, of course, a big question. And what I would say is that we have now managed to control the classical infectious diseases either through antibiotics
Mm-hmm.
or vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, has been a major advantage to our patients, but it has come with a price. And the price is that uh, people are not as worried about infectious diseases as they used to be. And of course, we see that today in the United States and elsewhere, where people are ignoring precautions and not taking vaccines because they're no longer worried about that in those infectious diseases, not realizing that the price of that is the return of those infectious diseases. So there's that issue, and there's also the issue of antimicrobial resistance, which is a product of our success. And so keeping the public informed is, I would say, now a really major goal for organizations like WSPID, because the choices that people make are now made in large part because of what they hear or what they read on media which did not exist in the past.
Yeah.
And so, what the medical profession and the infectious disease profession in particular has to disseminate is knowledge and advice, not simply on the personal level, that is, in the office, but generally speaking, in the press, various social media. And I see that as a critical issue today. We are not used to the idea of communicating to the public. We sort of feel that's beneath us, but it's no longer the case. We need to make scientific knowledge available to the general public. And one of the things I argue for is that science should be taught in grade school. Children are open minded, whereas adults are not. And children can learn. They can learn science. It's not that they're too stupid to learn. It's rather the opposite. They're intelligent and open and are not prejudiced the way adults are. So that's a step which I would love to see. That is science being taught in grade school or beginning in grade school.
That's a great idea. I think that is something I've thought about a lot especially over the last few months, about how we in infectious diseases spend a lot of our time giving vaccines, developing new vaccines, monitoring the safety of vaccines, and yet we're not very great at having those conversations with people about getting the vaccine. So we can make the best vaccines in the world, but if no one wants to get it, it doesn't do its job anymore. And so, trying to be, like you said, trying to be open about talking. Maybe we're not used to it. Maybe we don't know the right way to do it. I do think it is definitely the next frontier of us trying to get better at those conversations, and the big conversations too, not just the individual ones like you said, but being able to speak to the public in a way that is communicating in the way that they are able to hear us and understand what we're saying, rather than quoting some of the studies that we've done. So yeah, that's a big obstacle moving forward, I know, but also a big opportunity. So if you were to talk to a young resident or fellow who is embarking on a journey in pediatric infectious diseases right now, and deciding that's the career path they want to take, what advice would you give them, and what would you tell them to pursue in the future?
Training in infectious diseases today requires a greater knowledge than it did in the past, and it's more difficult because we know more, and therefore training is more more complicated than it used to be. Certainly, and I think this is generally the case in infectious disease training programs. I think doing a research study is really critical in training, because unless you know how knowledge is generated, you have a sort of a superficial idea about truth and falsehood. And doing research teaches you how difficult it is to learn something new, and how you have to be skeptical about whatever statement is made, and look at both evidence for something or against something. So, I think today it is really important that people in training have some scientific experience so that they understand how difficult it is to add to knowledge, and how wrong it is to be dogmatic about whatever it is. And I think that helps you also to explain things to patients, both the positive things and the reactions that may occur. Yeah. So I think that's really the critical point, which unfortunately may mean that training has to be longer.
Yeah.
I only had, speaking personally, I had just 2 years of advanced infectious diseases training. From there, I went to CDC, but that's a long story. But anyway, I think 2 years is not enough.
Yeah, because I'm
And
sure you also continued to learn lots of things as you moved on in the other stages. But now sometimes, you're expected to learn everything you need to know during fellowship and then move on. So yeah, that has changed a lot, and I know it's a hot topic right now, trying to figure out the best way to make sure that we teach people and train them and prepare them in the best way possible. Did you find that was part of the goal and objective of WSPID at the beginning?
oh
Was
yeah.
it focused on training and making sure that there were shared ideas about that? And of course, I know there was from a research and scientific standpoint from the very beginning.
Yes, it was also helpful that it was international because, as you know, there are prejudices, local prejudices in different parts of the world, and I think it was helpful for everyone to realize that people in some other place were doing things differently, and WISPID fulfilled that role, which was cross education, so to speak, and avoiding local prejudices. So, of course, that's true of any international organization, but in a field like science, I think it really is critical.
I have especially enjoyed that with my time as part of WSPID. We do have the ability to communicate, and obviously we have colleagues in other parts of the world, but being able to actually go and go to meetings in person and to interact and learn from different parts of the world really has been eye-opening for me. One of the things that I love most about WSPID is the fact that we work really hard to get to parts of the world that maybe don't have the frequent conversations and or a lot of pediatric ID providers. I know I work at an institution where I'm surrounded by another 15 pediatric infectious disease doctors, which is unusual. A lot of people are the only one in many miles, and so was that always part of the thought process with some of the societies around the world that maybe aren't they're maybe working in isolation as a pediatric ID doctor?
Yes, definitely. It works both ways. I have a great many friends in India, and of course they are facing infectious diseases, which uh, by and large don't exist in the United States. But they also start out with certain local prejudices, just as we do,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really interesting to see them reflect on how things are done differently elsewhere. And having myself traveled to India a number of times, I've certainly learned a lot about diseases that I don't see here, like rabies,
Mm-hmm.
just one example. So, cross fertilization across borders is really important, especially in infectious diseases. I mean, it's probably true in other specialties as well, but since infectious diseases in some cases tend to be local, you can really learn a lot by talking to people in other countries.
Absolutely. I have found that recently we've been talking, both my global health committee that's part of the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society in North America, but also in my local Cincinnati pediatric ID group. We've been using some of the WSPID webinars, learning about some things. For example, we've seen a lot more malaria over the past few years here in Cincinnati, and you know there are many, many things that we can learn from other parts of the world about malaria, as we don't see it as often. And I do think that, WSPID, one of the goals, of course, is to continue to work with each other and to learn from each other and to provide the best kind of mentorship. And I do think we live in such a, as you mentioned, it's sometimes not good for infections that they can quickly move from one side of the world to the other. But with all of the technology we have with Zoom and other platforms, to be able to have journal clubs internationally now. We have a WSPID journal club where we frequently are collaborating with another society across the world. We're able to have these kinds of meetings and these webinars and journal clubs even more so than we could before, which is very exciting. It sometimes makes for some wacky times that we have the meetings, depending on where you are, but it definitely is one of the things that I love most about it. I think we're about to run out of time, but before we close, are there any last thoughts you want to share? Any anecdotes or stories that you remember
Yeah.
about WSPID over the
Well,
last years?
well, since not so much about WSPID, but since you mentioned that you were in Cincinnati, of course, I knew Albert Sabin, and I traveled to Russia and met the Russian polio investigators way back. And I mention that because, uh, as you know, Sabin showed that his vaccine worked in Russia. I mean, he went there and befriended some of the people whom I met, and it was the Russian studies that really brought the polio vaccine back to the United States for general use. Unfortunately, that situation is not likely to be reproduced, but it's an illustration of the importance of worldwide infectious diseases and communication and transfer of knowledge. And that must continue despite any differences in foreign policy.
I agree. And infectious diseases don't listen to politics or foreign policy. And so I think that's important moving forward that we continue to work together. And I'm thankful for that. Well, I thank you so much for your time. It is definitely an honor to get to interview you. We are thankful that you were part of the initiation of WSPID and all the contributions it's made thus far. And I hope it continues to make. Thanks again.
Thank you.